From beautiful Baltimore, Maryland, former home of the Colts, and that is today's sports scarring moment. Most of you watching this aren't even old enough to know that long before Peyton Manning's Colts were lighting it up in Indianapolis, Johnny Unitas' Colts were blazing through Baltimore. But one day the Ursays and the Mayflower trucks attacked. And then, I'll let Colts superfan Matt Neufield tell y'all the rest of the tale. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, follow on each and every last one of the socials at Pearce TV, but most importantly, please enjoy this week's episode of...
It was one of the worst nights of our history.
When it happened, it was a shock. It came out of nowhere for me.
Today D-Day, Bob?
D-Day for what?
Decision?
No decisions.
People were angry. There was widespread anger.
I have not any intention to move the team. If I did, I would tell you about it, okay?
So I grew up in Frederick, Maryland, in Western Maryland, and growing up in the 60s and 70s, most of us out there were Baltimore and University of Maryland sports fans. They represented a lot of things. In the 60s and 70s, those are my formative years. Kid, tween, teenager, and then even into the early 80s as a college student, formative years. They represented a great organization. Not to generalize or stereotype, which I hate, they had that blue-collar city, industrial feel. They were tough guys, but they were also down to earth. They were everyday working men. That's what sports figures were back then. They weren't making these huge, multi-million-dollar contracts. And they were stars, they were entertainers, but they were also very down to earth. And they were living in neighborhoods with everyone else back then. So they were, the pay was entirely different, even into the 60s and 70s. Anyway, so they represented down-to-earth guys, blue-collar guys, working-class guys. They represented Baltimore. They were participating in community events. Back then there were even more community events that the guys went out and then to dinners, breakfasts, lunches, events, all Rotary, fraternal things, all that. So they represented the average everyday guy, and then they were a great sports organization, and they were a winning organization in the 60s and 70s, the Baltimore Colts. So spirit, fellowship, teamwork, and just great people and a great organization. There was that early 70s Super Bowl that the Colts won. The Colts won a Super Bowl on a last-second kick, and I believe it was an icy, snowy day, and everyone's at home watching on their one TV in the house, and I was a little kid when that happened. I forget what age, I forget what year, but man, that was the moment, just to stand there, and everyone in the house cheered. That was just a great moment.
After all those great moments and the decades of pouring love into Baltimore's team, at what point did Matt hear that his beloved Colts might be on the move?
I'm a career journalist, and I follow the news even since I was a little kid. And when the Colts left in '84, I was actually working in a newspaper, but I didn't follow sports news closely then in my teens and 20s. So I didn't hear whispers. When it happened, it was a shock. It came out of nowhere for me. I learned about it when it happened, and it was a shock when the Colts were stolen from Baltimore. And again, I didn't follow any rumors. I knew one thing, I think, again, I didn't do any research, so if I'm wrong, there's that caveat, but I think attendance may have been going down. I think there were rumblings, but I didn't know it was the Colts. Rumblings about teams moving. So I may have heard very distant things, but not directly to the Colts. So it was a shock and a surprise when it happened.
If you let the then Baltimore Colts brass tell it, the state of Maryland wouldn't let them use public money to build a new stadium, and that's why they ended up leaving in the middle of the night. I wonder how Matt feels about that controversial issue that honestly still comes up today.
I know, and that's often the case with team movements, is stadium, money, funding, right? In fights with local officials, fights with state officials. That's a common occurrence, and it shouldn't be. But I'll tell you this. First of all, I'll say right out, I have no problems. I'm a very liberal, lefty, progressive, hippie, blue state Democrat. That's how I describe myself. I don't think that factors into funding for pro sports teams. I think $0 should go into funding for any private enterprise, because we have so much that needs fixing in this country. And again, trying not to be political, just totally common sense, objective. We have so much that our government needs to fix, and we don't need to fix public entertainment.
So when the Mayflower trucks did finally pack up and go, what was the reaction like in 1980s Western Maryland?
When I found out and all my friends found out in family, neighborhood, it was a shock, and people were angry. There was widespread anger. Again, Colts country, Western Maryland, you know, and anger, disappointment, sadness. I mean, you get attached to your sports teams. They were, I think the Ursays were saying it was, you know, oh, they don't want us and they won't fund the stadium and the attendance is down and the team is faulting, blah, blah, blah. I think that was it. I think there's a little twinge in the back of my brain, but it didn't alleviate the pain for people. It should not have happened. And again, none of this is political. It really should not have happened. They should have talked to the people. And just to steal a team in the middle of the night is horrible.
But who does Matt hold responsible for this horrible act? Who is the target of all that anger? In other words, who gets the blame?
I do think everyone had to take some of the blame. It's my home state, you know, and I've supported, again, not being political, generally most politicians in Maryland, and gotten to know a lot of them. But I think the city fell down on it. I think the state fell down on it. I think our federal representatives fell down on it. And you're saying, Matt, do you mean in funding? No. But I think in sitting down and having meetings and conversations and trying to work out a plan with the Ursays. And yeah, and let's face it, it probably would have, if they had done that, it would have been money. You know, even though I'm against it, if that's what had to be done in that context. But it seems like all the negotiations and talk broke down. So everyone shares the blame, but I blame the Ursays more than anyone else, because they literally drove, what was it, Mayflower moving vans, that's rich in everyone's minds, to the stadium, I think late at night or the middle of the night, loaded everything up and you know, ran out of town, like the getaway. That's horrible. That's horrible. They couldn't have had a press conference, they couldn't explain things, they just literally stole the team, not literally stole, but rhetorically stole the team in the middle of the night. So most of the blame to the Ursays, but some blame to the politicians. And I know Jim Irsay has just been, did he die or did he just died. So no, I'm not being insensitive. And I realize that just happened within weeks of this interview. So I'm not being insensitive. So put that aside, but you really, yes, to this day. And I think a lot, you talk to people, it was 40 years ago. Not in the grand scheme of things, not that long ago. And you talk to people, and yeah, it comes up. It's not coming up in relation to Jim Irsay passing away. Again, put that aside. But in conversations about local sports and Baltimore sports, yeah. And not that I'm angry and cantankerous, but you know, it's a pain, you know, to this day. And then you realize they're in Indianapolis. What, am I going to hate people in Indianapolis or Indiana? No, I'm happy for them. They got a team. They got Peyton Manning. They got Super Bowl wins. Good for them. So no, I'm not angry at them.
But a little over a decade later, football finally returned back to Baltimore in the form of the Ravens.
Wow, ecstatic. Just great news. You know, and all the news that came, I have to admit, I know I said I'm against public funding, but that's just me. To put that aside, all the news that came later with the support from the Maryland Stadium Authority, the location, there were no problems with the location. I know that location. The only problem with the location where the Ravens Stadium is now is Hammerjacks was there, and I'm a big rock and roller. I lived at Hammerjacks for a decade. The feeling was great because the location was good. It was an old industrial thing. It didn't displace people or a forest or a park. It's just this old, ugly industrial area. It was right near 395, 95, 495. And then the name, the Ravens. Great name. Everyone loves it. The colors, black and dark purple. That's tough. Everything they did was right. And then when you go in that stadium, I went to the first Ravens game at the stadium. I'm going to call it Ravens Stadium. I can never keep track of what company is up on the sign anyway. But I went to the first game at Ravens Stadium. Beautiful stadium. Everyone loves the state. So everything they did was right, to answer your question. So people were really happy, ecstatic. And then the people, the owners, the early coaches, the coaches to this day, I mean, John Harbaugh, and how long has he been there? At least a decade, right? And all the players, and they've just done it right. So I think, I know people are very happy with the Ravens. I mean, they've had very few really bad seasons in 30 years. They've had a few, maybe, but it's been great. Like you said, they won a Super Bowl, and then they won another one. Gotta be happy.
Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to you in particular, for making it this far in the video. Comment a thumbs up so I know that it's you. But I'm leave you with this parting message from Matt himself. Post-credit scene, go.
I do want to say one thing. The whole focus of this is your first major sports disappointment, right? So I want to note that I'll say I'm 63. So when the Ravens left in the early 80s, I was in my early 20s. And people say, your first big disappointment was in your early 20s? And yes, because, we all know this, sports fans, but in the 60s and 70s and into the early 80s, all the local sports teams, University of Maryland football, University of Maryland basketball, the Baltimore Colts, the Baltimore Orioles, had glory seasons in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, all of them. So yes, you get upset when a favorite player was traded, you'd lose an important playoff game, yeah, that's standard. But look at the Orioles, was it 17 or 18 straight winning seasons? Unbelievable. Maryland, Jerry Claiborne, Bobby Ross, Maryland, Lefty Driesell, Gary Williams. I don't know if Gary was there in the early 80s, but whatever. All those teams were doing well in the 60s, 70s, the early 80s. And then that Colts thing. So yeah, my biggest sports disappointment occurred in my early 20s. We were lucky. But you know what? Just again, we came back with the Ravens. And just to show how people can be a big Ravens fan, I brought a little of my Ravens gear here.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.